Okay, welcome back, Latin class, to the series of videos I am doing. I'm sorry, this one is a little bit delayed. I thought I had one already ready, but I didn't, and then the weekend happened. But hopefully, this is not too late. It's never too late to learn the passive. Yeah, so we are doing chapter 18 today, and this is a rather big conceptual chapter, and it is a rather big new endings chapter. So for the past few weeks, been able to kind of just chill out. We didn't have to learn a whole bunch of verb endings, but that is behind us. And for the next couple weeks, we are going to be just jumping into adding. Whoa, this huge bird! Wow, this huge bird just flew by. I think that's got to be a good omen. We're talking about the Romans. Big bird. It's great. This is really good. Then now I'm just imagining Big Bird flying by. Yeah, it was not that big. Anyhow, yeah, so for the next couple of weeks, we are going to be adding on a whole bunch of new verb endings and a new way of translating verbs, and that is translating verbs in the passive voice. Now, this has come up in class a couple of times in terms of inadvertent translation of verbs into the passive. And so now we just want advertent translations of the passive. And you're really going to have to forget all of your kind of fear or aversion to the passive voice that may have been driven into your brain during high school when we were told the passive voice is never right. There are many times in which the passive voice is great. In fact, when we read Caesar, if we read Caesar in this class or when we read Caesar in our lives, you will find that Caesar did almost everything in the passive voice. The Gallic tribes were killed incessantly. Like he never says that he did that, so it seems very. Anyhow, it's interesting, but no need to worry about Caesar or the big uses of the passive. What we want to learn, what we want to focus on for the rest of this week is learning to recognize passive verb endings and then be able to translate the passive verb correctly. So let's move on. So I think we're just going to first have kind of an active voice versus passive voice explanation. Up until this point, so 15 weeks into your Latin journey, we have been exclusively working with the active voice. And I'm going to leave it at that. We're not going to talk about kind of deponent senses. So yeah, so the active voice. I praise, I do praise, I am praising. Those are all present tense actives. I will praise, I shall praise, future tense active. I did praise, I was praising, I used to praise, imperfect tense actives. I praised, I have praised, perfect tense actives. I will have praised, future perfect tense active. And I had praised, pluperfect tense active. The reason I wanted to write these all out is because you can see that many of these tenses that we do already know, many of these active tenses do use auxiliary verbs, including ones like I have praised, I will have praised, I had praised. That will be a complication as we learn the passive voice. It is really important to keep track of how you are using that auxiliary verb have in English because that can be a point of confusion. So just if you're hyper aware of it, not in a neurotic way, but just in an effective way, that will be really helpful to you. So this week we are going to learn the passive voice of the present system, in particular of the first and second conjugations. So if I praise means actively the active of the verb I praise. I am praised. I am being praised. That's the present passive. The future active, something like I praise. I do praise. I will praise. The future, I'm sorry, let me back up. The future I will praise in the passive voice is I will be praised. The imperfect active, which we've been translating it as I used to praise or I was praising, now in the passive we have this option of I was being praised, I used to be praised, I was praised, and then we have our perfect options. I was praised, I will have been praised, I had been praised. So you'll notice this kind of consistent, almost this consistent participial form of the verb with all of these auxiliary verbs. I think I can confidently say that all passive voice verbs will need some sort of auxiliary verb to render them into the passive. So keeping track of those is our task. One way, and so one of the things that you're going to be thinking about for the rest of your Latin lives is how to translate a passive verb. One way to make sure that you're in the passive voice is to recognize that a verb in the passive voice can never take an object. So in the sentence, I praise Caesar, that verb, praise, takes the object Caesar. But in the passive sentence, Caesar is praised. Notice that there's nothing you can do that will allow that verb to take an object. So Caesar is praised is our passive verb. And Caesar will lead the army. Here, the army is the object of the verb, so we know that that verb is active. But in the phrase, the army will be led by Caesar, hang on, I'm gonna pause this. I'm having like washing machine issues, so give me just 1 second. Oh wait, okay, I think it's okay. I put too many towels. Okay, I think we're fine. Yeah. So the army will be led by Caesar. So paranoid about this washing machine. That's a passive voice, no object. Rome was conquering many foreign lands. Here, many foreign lands is the object of was conquering, so we know was conquering is active. But in the phrase foreign lands were conquered by Rome, we don't have an object, we can't have an object, but what we do have is an agent, which is very common. By Rome is an agent, and that's very common with the passive voice. Finally, they had mixed their metaphors. I'm sure that's an old joke related to something I used to know about. Metaphors here is the object of mix. But so I think the reason I really like this sentence, they had mixed, often that becomes, people confuse that with the passive voice, but that's just pluperfect. They had mixed. We know that it's active because it takes an object. Whereas the phrase metaphors had been mixed by them, we have an agent but no object. That verb, which cannot take an object, had been mixed. That's our pluperfect passive. So that's a good way of testing if you're in a passive voice. So what is going to happen to some of us 100% is you'll come to class with some sort of translation like I killed, and I'll say, can you put that into a passive voice? And your first instinct will be I have killed, so supply some sort of auxiliary verb. But even in that phrase, I have killed, see if it can take an object. I have killed my washing machine. It can take an object, so it's not passive. To get to passive, you have to say I was killed. And obviously that would just be metaphorical. So that's kind of passive theory. That's how we're going to be translating it. It's something we're going to be working on, as I think I mentioned in class. For some people, this is comes really quickly, and for others, it doesn't, and that is fine. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It doesn't indicate anything about anything, except that our brains are different. So translating the passive is something we're just going to be working on for a long time. Identifying, putting verbs into the passive in Latin is much more straightforward because you're just adding a distinct set of endings, a new set of endings. And you are adding those in the present system to the first principal part in the same way we were doing for active. And similarly, we're going to learn perfect passives. It's just a different set of endings. So practically speaking, for this chapter, a lot of the practical work you're going to be doing is just recognizing these endings, memorizing these endings. We're not going to have a memorization quiz on this just because of the way timing has worked out, but it will be on the midterm, and then eventually there will be some sort of, quiz on it. Yeah, we'll figure it out. But so anyhow, here are endings. Here's the kitten. This is like it's not, I wouldn't say a doomed video, but just a very distracted video. Yeah, she's not loving the washing machine situation. Neither of the cats are. They're both like, why did you put so many towels into the washing machine? Okay, are we all alive? She just literally drove through. Anyhow. Okay, so here's our index. First person or, ris, ter, mer, mini, ntor. I've deliberately here given you most of these endings without any connecting vowel because they are going to transcend all of the conjugations. So, and they kind of just keep popping up in places you wouldn't expect. So it's good to just really get into the habit of recognizing R as the first person, ris as second person, tor. You see what I've done here. Good to recognize these little consonant families because they will be applicable in many situations. But so we're going to see how it we're going to see how it games out in the first conjugation. So here it's that same set of endings, those passive endings. In the first conjugation, you will not be surprised that the connecting vowel, the vowel that connects those endings to the stem in the first conjugation, is an A, with the exception of the first person, which is always kind of its own deal. So we have laudor, I am praised. Laudaris, A-R-I-S, you are praised. Laudator, he, she, or it is praised. Laudamor, we are praised. Laudamini, you all are praised. Laudantor, they are praised. So here, just as we have done before, just to kind of let's not do it with the first person, let's do it with the second. To get that stem, you would take the first principal part, laudo, you would drop off the O, you would add your connecting vowel A, and then your ending. So that's how that's going to work, and then you'll end up with that beautiful laudaris. Similarly, if we were to do it one more time in the third person, you would take laudo, drop off the O, it's a first conjugation, so you're going to have an A connecting vowel, and then your passive ending. So you are familiar with this. We've done this before. We might be a little out of practice, and that's completely all right. We're going to keep doing it, and it's going to be fine. To form the future, this hopefully will ring some old bells. So remember, the first conjugation, future active, had this BO situation. So lauda bo, lauda bis, lauda bit, lauda, etc. That's active. Similarly, with the future passive, you're going to still have that laudab, but then you'll have these delightful future passive endings. So the only thing that's really kind of outrageous and insulting here is the second person singular. So you have laudabor, I will be praised, which looks just like the future active, but with an R, so it's passive. So this laudaberis, this is just kind of its own deal because it's got that E-R-I-S, it's a very long ending. If just to remind us, if this were active, if we wanted to say you will praise, we would have laudabis. But in the passive, we have to take that laudab and add that whole eris ending. It's very long. So it's easier to recognize, but harder to kind of figure out logically. But you will be praised. The third person singular, notice it's laudabit. That's our future active with you are ending. Laudabimor, see that M-U-R. So you're taking that laudab and adding M-U-R. Laudabimini, laudabuntor. So there's patterns. They make a little bit of sense. And of course, this will translate, I will be praised, you will be praised, he, she, or it will be praised, we will be praised, you all will be praised, and they will be praised. So that future, the first conjugation, future, has this A, B, and then a series of endings, often with I's, but not always. And hopefully then you will be comforted to know that imperfect passive is even more regular. We have laudabar, laudabaris, laudabator. So remember, in the imperfect of imperfect active, we had laudabam. So imperfect passive, laudabar. Second person singular imperfect active was laudabas. So now we have laudabaris. So there's still that BA ending throughout the imperfect passive, but with these particular passive endings. And so second conjugation is very similar, except for instead of all of those A's, we are going to have E's. So in the first person singular, this is a little distinct, this E-O-R ending as opposed to just an O-R ending. Remember, for the present first person, we just have an O-R. But for the present second conjugation passive, we have E-O-R. And then we have this eris ending, ator, amor, amini, entor. So very similar to what we saw in the first conjugation, but as you might expect, it has the connecting vowel of E rather than A. Similarly, in the future, we have this EB instead of AB, but the endings are all otherwise the same, including this beautiful second person singular. This actually looks hopefully much more predictable. So I will be warned, you will be warned, he, she, or it will be warned. We will be warned, they will be warned. You all will be warned, and they will be warned. So same endings, different connecting vowel. And unsurprisingly, the imperfect is the same. Bar, baris, bator, bomber, bomini, bantor. These are all the exact same passive endings we saw in the first conjugation, but with a connecting vowel of E instead of A. And to do an imperfect passive, it's I used to be praised or I was praised. You used to be praised or you were praised. He, she, or it used to be praised or was praised. And you can do that being too. We were being praised, we were praised, we used to be praised. Those are all appropriate translations. Notice none of them take an object. Right. So I think that's the end of my little. And then one last little twist. There are passive infinitives. And so what I've done here is demonstrated how for the first and second conjugation. So we should enjoy this. It's actually quite straightforward to create a passive infinitive from an active infinitive. So just to review, the active infinitive is always the second principal part, laudare monera. We know this, you guys have been doing it for a long time. But so to create the passive infinitive, you just take that E, this little guy at the end, and turn it into an I. And just so we know, like laudare, this passive infinitive would translate to something like to be praised. Monere would translate to something like to be warmed. So that's a passive infinitive as opposed to praise or to warm. So, yes. So, our task now, definitely we're going to be translating in class, so we'll figure out how that goes. But, in your private time when we're not in class, memorizing these endings, taking first and second conjugation verbs, and just putting them into the present active and then the present passive. Future active, future passive, imperfect active, imperfect passive. Just do a few of those a day, and that hopefully that should help you settle in. We don't know the perfect system yet. I just want to emphasize that these rules are just applying to the present system. So that's nice. And so that would be my advice. Is just like in this chapter we have. Are you kidding me? Oh, we do. No, we have. Annoying. Well, we only have one second conjugation verb in this chapter. Moeo, moera, moe, motem. So just take moea and write out the present active and then write out the present passive right next to it and do that a couple times. Or you can go back to another chapter where we actually have a first conjugation verb that's not too long. Recito is very long, so is nawigo. But just take nawigo, write out the future active and then the future passive. But this is a really good time for me to remind you to keep using that glossary, the appendix on page 501. It's really helpful to just keep checking your work and make sure you are on track. There was something else I was going to mention. Oh, let's talk about Wideor. We'll talk about that tomorrow in class. I'll start off with that. Okay, and so the other last thing in this chapter, I am not sure. I'm not sure why I have this title and the answer of Ab. Again, it's probably an old reference that I've forgotten because my brain doesn't work as well as it used to. But so we're learning another ablative in this chapter, and that's the ablative of agent. And so, actually, not quite. So when you have a passive verb, so let's say we have this sentence, Caesar is warned. So admonator, that's our third person singular present passive of admoneo. And so in this sentence, Caesar is our subject, admonator is our passive verb. But when you want to ask the question, like who admonished him, by whom was Caesar admonished, you would put that, if it's a person or some sort of person-like thing, like a god, you would put that with the preposition a or ab if it's in front of a vowel, and then the agent in the ablative. So Caesar was advised by the gods. In the second sentence, the city, orbs, delabator, that's an imperfect passive. The city was destroyed ab malis viris, by bad men, by bad boys. And then finally, patria conservabitur, the country will be saved by the citizens, by these citizens, ab his kibibus. So you can see in all of these examples, the ab is answering the question, by whom was this done? But you would only use the a or ab when it's by a person. If the passive, as you can see, is being done by a non-person, or I'm sure I stole this from somewhere, probably Wheelock, a non-animate instrument, which is not a phrase I use every day, you don't actually need the a or the ob. You could just have an ablative of means, which doesn't require a preposition. So in this same example, Caesar is admonished, but if he is admonished by these omens, rather omens, which are not people, you don't need the ob. You could just put his prodigies, just put that in the ablative. If the city is destroyed by flames rather than by people, you don't need the preposition. You can just put flammes in the ablative. And finally, if the country it will be saved by truth rather than by citizens, you don't need the preposition. You could just put veritate in the ablative, and you have an ablative means, and you are all set. So these are fine points. It's not, I wouldn't, the key is you want to be able to recognize what these ablatives, in particular, the ablatives that do not have a preposition, you want to be able to recognize them for what they are. But I think this is a little more instinctual than all this chit-chatting would indicate, and so we'll just see as it comes up. And so here are some more examples of passive versus active, etc. So in the phrase libellum amo, so look, the sentence starts with an accusative. That's a really good sign that the verb coming up is not going to be passive, because in Latin, you're never going to see an accusative with a passive verb. So we know then that, and then we look at amo and we say, of course, no, it's an active verb. I love the little books. That's an active verb, and taking an object, very straightforward. But in the phrase libellus ab me amator, libellus is in the nominative. We don't have any accusatives anywhere, and we have this very nicely specific third person singular passive, present passive verb, amator. So the little book is loved ab me, by me. I have to use the preposition with this ablative me here because I am a person. Yeah. So like, that'll be a fun tell, like if you're using that chat GPT or whatever everyone's freaking out about, like, is chat GPT trying to get away by doing Latin by pretending it's a person and using ab when it has me? And that's a question for the great minds. So the second example, here we have an accusative, we have an active verb, the enemies destroyed the city. But in our next sentence, we have orbs in the nominative, we have a passive verb, the city was destroyed, and then ab hostibus. These enemies are people, so they take a preposition ab. And then finally, in our last example, omnes scientiam desiderabunt. Omnes is the subject of our verb, which is active and therefore takes an object. Everyone will desire knowledge, and then the sentence knowledge will be desired. There's our passive verb with that beautiful TUR ending. They really jump out at you. They're quite remarkable. Science will be desired ab omnibus, by all. So we have ab plus prepositions. So that is my lecture for this chapter. I felt like this should have been a longer PowerPoint to really demonstrate like how much work this is going to be. But it's going to be a lot of work, but we're going to do it. It's going to be fine. It's week 5. Like, what is anybody doing this week? So, and I'm joking. Like, I know you're all completely overwhelmed with midterms. We are going to have a quiz this week. It is not going to be really on this. I might have a little bit on this, but it's mainly going to be on the relatives. So I'd say let's take this week. Let's take our time, start to get this into our heads, start to figure out how to translate it. And in that spirit, I'm going to ask you to do let's just say 1 through 8 again of the Exercitationes on page 150. Go from there. So just take it easy. If you get stuck on something, bring it to class and we will figure it out. But otherwise, thank you for this rather deranged lecture. And I will see you tomorrow, I hope. Okay.